Hello book lovers and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do my January reading wrap up. Alright, so the first month of the year has come and gone. I can't decide if this month was long or if it was short. It was somehow both at the same time, and reading wise it was a very unusual month for me, and you will see that in just a moment. But in this video I will be trying not to play with these two pieces of hair that I have hanging here because this is the first time I've ever done this style. I think it looks cute, but I am definitely not someone who usually likes hair in my face, so I apologize if I'm constantly I will try not to. But in this video, I will be talking about all the books that I read or DNF'd in the month of January. I will give you some basic stats as well. Usually I have been doing like a mid-month check-in. This year, my mid-month check-ins are going to be very irregular. It's really going to depend on how many books I have read in the first half of the month, if I have any vlogs going on or anything like that. I'm pretty sure in February, actually I'm 100% sure in February I won't be doing a mid-month check-in, and I didn't this month. But as far as how I do my wrap-ups, I have started doing it where I talk about my books from essentially my least favorite to my favorite. So I'll start off with the books, yes, multiple books that I DNF'd, any books that I may not have given a rating, which is usually like a nonfiction book, and then I'll go from lowest rated to my highest rated. So before we get into the reviews, let's go ahead and look at those stats. All right, so this month I ended up finishing, like actually finishing 5 books, which if you've been on my channel for a while is a little bit on the lower side, unless you joined me in October and November, in which I was only reading 4 books a month. But usually I feel like if I'm reading just physical books, I can probably manage about 6 or 7 books a month. So I did end up DNFing 3 whole books this month, so that definitely took up a lot of my time, and therefore the amount of books I read is a little bit lower. As far as the page count goes, I ended up reading 1,601 pages, which is also a little bit lower, and none of these books were super long. As far as audiobooks, a whopping 0 hours. I didn't listen to a single second of audiobooks. I have since downloaded an audiobook on Libby that I'm hoping to kind of listen to throughout the month. And then my book club book that I'm reading in February is also going to be an audiobook. So I'm kind of seeing if I can ease myself back into audiobook listening. It is something that I really enjoyed, but for some reason my brain has been really repelled by the idea of listening to audiobooks, but we'll see if we can change her mind. As far as an average rating goes, it was a 4.25, which is super high, and the fact that I DNF'd 3 books and I don't rate those definitely helped. So I have a feeling that this year is going to be the year of DNFs. I think I'm really just kind of done with ending the year and being like, you know, it was all right. No, I want a great reading year, and that means just saying, sorry, mediocre book, I am just gonna not finish you. All right, so those are the general stats. So let's go ahead and jump into my 3 DNFs. All right, so my first DNF of the year is going to be Desk Country by R.M. Romero. I picked up this book. I was a little, nervous about it because it had relatively low ratings, but the idea of a couple going into the underworld to save their girlfriend, because this is polyamorous, was really intriguing to me. It was also by a Hispanic author, and I am trying to read more Hispanic authors because that is an ethnicity group that I have struggled with in the past. And unfortunately, as soon as I picked up this book and I opened it, I was like, oh, because it is written in verse or poetry. I'm gonna say verse. I'm not sure if I'm using that term correctly because it's not something I read or really enjoy, so I'm not very well versed in it. But you know, as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to enjoy this book very much because this is not a format that I enjoy reading. And unfortunately, that ended up being true. I did end up giving it a try because, you know, tastes change over time. So maybe my opinion on verse writing has changed. Not really, at least when it comes to this author. I got 73 pages into it, which isn't actually too far into the story because it is written with so few words per page. And I really felt like this was just too angsty, too YA for my taste. I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna hold it against it that this feels like a YA book because it is a YA book, but it was just the type of YA book that wasn't working for me. I am gonna go ahead and read you a line just to give you like an idea of what we're working with here. "Hey mermaids," I called to them, "can I join you?" The second girl lowered her camera, her tone blazed with secret fire as she said, "Why would we want that? When princes steal our voices." "I'm not a prince," I insisted. The first girl blinked, the dying light from her eyes. "You look like one." I lifted my arms to show them otherwise, letting the sunset paint my scars shell pink. "A few months ago, a river stole me," I said. "The doctors had to crack me open to guide its waters out. Princes get rescued by mermaids before the waves can take them, and I don't expect to be rescued by anybody." So that is kind of the vibe that is going on. Teenage me probably would have ate that up, but adult me is just kind of like, it was giving eye roll in my opinion, so I did decide that I was gonna go ahead and just put this book aside and not rate it because between the age group it was written for and the writing format, it would just be kind of unfair for me to rate it lowly and talk down about it, which I am doing right now, so whoops. The second book I ended up DNFing really kind of caused me to have an existential crisis. So I apologize if I kind of spiral as I talk about it. Hopefully I don't. And that is going to be Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. This was actually my first book that I pulled from my challenge cup, which if you are not familiar with that, I have a challenge cup where I've put 11 books that I would pull from January through November that I am intimidated by, that I'm unsure about, that I want to give a try, but I also need that extra push to do that. This is a book written by an Indigenous author. Each of the books in the Challenge Cup has a different kind of category that it's in, and I, just like Hispanic authors, am trying to read more books by Indigenous authors. However, while I was reading this book, I hated every moment of it. I did not like this book at all. It is definitely not the kind of story that I enjoy reading. And looking back at the synopsis, the words fevered dream jumped out at me. And I was like, that is kind of a turn off for me. Fever dreamed books, magical realism are just not genres that I vibe with super much. So I started to spiral a little bit because I have struggled with reading stories by Indigenous authors in the past, specifically with their writing style. And I was like, okay, what's the deal here? I mean, I continue to try to pick up their books so that I can get more acquainted with their writing style, their storytelling techniques, all that jazz, and it's just not clicking. So it's feeling like a me problem. But then I started to realize that I was kind of working against myself by picking up books with synopses that I'm not actually that interested in just because they are written by Indigenous authors. And so then when I don't enjoy the book, I blame it on the fact that it is written by an Indigenous author who has a different writing style than I'm used to, when actually they're just writing about stuff that I'm usually not into and I wouldn't be into no matter who was writing it. And so I feel like I had gotten to the point of being so desperate to find more books by Indigenous authors to read that I started picking up books that weren't for me. And that is obviously very counterproductive. It is very important to read books by authors who are part of minority groups that you are not a part of, but you can't let that get to the point where you are picking up books that you are not enjoying, because it's not good for you and it's not good for the author either. So I think this book really opened my eye to that, where I was like, okay, Natalie, you at this point have looked through the book community recommendation videos and lists that you have enough books by Indigenous authors with synopses that you're actually interested in. You do not need to be picking up these books out of desperation when you're like, it's not for me. I did look through some one-star reviews, and while some of them were definitely based in racism and homophobia, which is completely unacceptable, if you are rating a book lowly because you have an issue with Indigenous people or queer people, that's a problem. Like, you can't be doing that. But there were also other people who wrote things that made me realize that yes, this wasn't a book for me. In fact, there was actually a 5-star review that made me realize it wasn't for me, and that was, they're like, oh, this is a slice of life kind of book. And I'm like, I'm not a huge slice of life person. And then someone also called it, I think they called it like grimy realism, and that also is not 100% my cup of tea. As I kind of mentioned, this magical realism, slice of life, kind of just following someone and weird stuff is happening and it's being written in obscure ways, isn't really for me. I think that I do need a little bit more solid plotting. You know, I don't mind if there isn't 100% of a plot if I really love the character, but I do have to connect to the character like right away, which I did not with this character. But for the most part, I want to know like where we're going, what is the purpose of the story, and every review essentially was like, this book has no plot. And I was just like you follow this person to this point in their life and then it's just kind of like, oh, we arrived at the point and now we're done, you know? And for me, that's not an attractive story. I am once again going to read you a line from it just because this one line sticks in my head and kind of made me decide that this writing wasn't for me and maybe this kind of story wasn't for me. I start my morning like this. I wake up, take a piss, warm up last night's coffee, and open the rickety window in my bathroom where I usually do my smoking, since my building is a no-smoke zone. I butt them out in an old Diet Pepsi can that has seen better days. There isn't much to see beyond my bathroom window but the gray grit of the Odeon's bricks, a rusty fire escape, and a pigeon building its nest on the windowsill of an abandoned building across the alley. Every morning we meet here, me rubbing the ash and crusty scum from my lips, and that bird neatly piling little sticks, roaches, and chicken bones on the ledge. Silly little bird, I always think, building a home in a dead place. So, I mean, in a way, the writing is kind of nice, but it's also the kind of writing that for me gets a little exhausting to read after a while. So like reading that quote on its own, like without anything else around it, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of nice. But I also know that by the time I got to that quote, I was just like, we get it, you're just like this guy who's like living in a crappy apartment and you're a sex worker and you're just so cool, you belong in an indie film. And it wasn't my cup of tea. So we will be trying other books by Indigenous authors and I'm not saying I'm never gonna try Joshua Whitehead, because like I said, just reading that quote on its own, I'm like, the guy does have some writing talent, but we'll have to go ahead and check out if he's written any books with a synopsis that actually intrigues me. All right, I'm spending a lot of time on these DNFs, but what can I say? The final DNF was rather unexpected. I really did think that I would finish this book. I did think I was probably only going to give it 3 stars, and I think eventually I just decided that I did not want to waste my time on a 3-star book, especially when I had other books that I wanted to get to. So this is the one I got the furthest in, and that is The Winter's Duke by Claire Eliza Bartlett. I got 163 pages into this book. This is a young adult fantasy. It is sapphic. I felt like what really lost me was the behavior of the adults in the story. Essentially, we are following a 16-year-old girl, which I did not know about until like 100 pages into the book. I really was telling myself she's 18 or 19. She is 16, which just made everything else that happened in the story all the more ridiculous. When I found that out, I was like, I'm trying to forget the fact that she's 16, but I can't because I keep mentioning it. And so we have the 16-year-old girl. She is like the middle child of this duke, and they live above this lake in an ice palace, and the people in the lake, they're kind of these mermaid-like people, have magic, and they give this magic to her father. He refines it and sells it, and that is how their kingdom has become so powerful. At the beginning of this book, they are having what is called a bride show. Her oldest brother is getting prepared to select the person that he is going to marry. It is kind of getting to that point where maybe he is going to commit a coup and take over the dukedom from his father. This is one of those families where the only way you get what you want is to kill the people in your way, even if it is your own family. So our character has kind of been like keeping to herself. She's like, I want nothing to do with politics. She constantly spaces out when anything political is happening. She is wanting to go to university to become, I believe, a doctor. She does a lot with science and dissecting and experiments, and that is kind of her jam. She is very fascinated by the below, even though she does not have access to it because there are so many creatures down there that she does not have access to up here. And she's like, I want to explore the science aspect. She's not as interested in the magic as she is in like the science. However, the bride show is kind of put on hold because her brother throws a tantrum, essentially. And that very night, someone puts a curse on her family that they all fall asleep except for her. And so all of a sudden, all the ministers come to her and they're like, Your Majesty. And she's like, what's going on? I'm just 16 and I don't know anything about politics because I don't give a fuck. So at the same time, she's like, okay, it is my obligation to kind of try and protect this dukedom and make sure that no bad people take this as an opportunity to take over. And hopefully someone else in my family wakes up soon and can like take over because I don't want to be here. The way that the ministers treat this child who doesn't want to be here, she mentioned that the ministers never paid any attention to her because they know that she has no political ambition. And then all of a sudden, they're standing here like, how do you not know everything about this kingdom? And how do you not know the name of every single person? And how do you not know our relationship and our policies? And she's like, because I'm 16 and I don't know what's going on. And it was just like they would roll their eyes at her and they would glare at her, and some of them like genuinely hated her. There was like this guy who wants to form a parliament, and she's like, listen, I'm sorry, but I can't just restructure our government while my dad is asleep in case he wakes up, because he would straight up murder me if I did that. And he's like like he was like, she saw the hate shining from his eyes that the 16-year-old wouldn't completely restructure the way that this government was formed. And I was just like, it's like, who's the adult in the room? Because it's not you guys. And then on top of that, there is like this marriage, and there's this grown man who's trying to marry her as well. And I'm like, eh. And I will say the synopsis was a little misleading because it says, in the space of a single night, Ekata inherits the title of Duke, her brother's captivating warrior bride, and ever-encroaching challengers from without and within her ministry. Now, I want to emphasize the word her brother's captivating warrior bride. Her brother does not have a captivating warrior bride. He doesn't have any bride at all because the bride show was paused. So she didn't inherit anything. Essentially, there was this crusty, musty older man who wasn't like super old, but he was probably like in his 20s, who was like, oh, my army just happened to be passing by and I brought it to your walls to protect you. What if we got married? And she was like, that sounds like blackmail. I'm gonna walk into this room of people who are intending to marry my brother and just pick one of them and marry them instead of you. So, Girlie was just doing her best with what she had, but at the same time, she did not inherit a warrior bride. She just like picked a woman and was like, you know what, you smiled at me earlier, so we're gonna get married. And it just felt really weird, a 16-year-old getting married. I know this is kind of a historical setting, so like 16-year-olds were getting married back in the day, but here as a modern woman, I'm like, what the heck? And also, while the warrior bride was definitely a little bit more hard-headed than our character, most people were more hard-headed than our character. I wouldn't exactly describe her as a warrior, but I also didn't get to know her that well. So, but yes, essentially I got less than halfway through, but I just knew that this would be like a 3-star read. And I do think it's a duology. And I was like, I'm not going to continue the duology. And so I decided to go ahead and just put it down. All right, guys. Wow, I really had a lot to say about those books, but let's get into the books that I actually finished, starting with the one that I did not rate, and this is because it is a nonfiction book. Usually nonfictions I don't rate unless I'm like, that is a 5-star read. Otherwise, especially since this one is kind of like a memoir-ish kind of situation, I'm like, well, I feel like I can't really rate someone's experience. And that is going to be Read Dangerously, The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times by Asar Nafasi. I decided to pick this book up rather spontaneously just because the title of it really captured my attention with current political climate and everything. It just felt like the right read. I enjoyed quite a few parts of the story. Essentially, this author is writing letters to her father. He has passed away at this point. However, he is someone that she went to for everything. They were someone who talked a lot about their beliefs and politics and everything that was going on and everything that has happened to them throughout their life. And so she once again turns to him as Trump gets elected for his first term and as COVID comes around and as the Black Lives Matter movement starts. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that she's reaching out to her father to kind of discuss. And I did like the format of the story, kind of that epistolary. Would it still be considered epistolary if it's nonfiction? I'm not really sure, but it is letters. And so she is kind of writing different letters, and in each letter, she is focusing on a few specific authors that she has read throughout her life that have really impacted her and her political beliefs and the way that she views political activism and all of that jazz. Some of this I felt like was pretty basic. I feel like this is a good book for someone who's maybe new to reading or is new to reading in a more political manner. But for me, who has been invested in reading politically for quite a while, it wasn't exactly anything new and shiny. But I did like some of the examples she provided and some of the interpretations and analysis that she did on the authors. I will say that if you come across an author that you're interested in reading, the books that she talks about, she often gives spoilers. So a lot of these are authors that I'm not that interested in reading because I'm not like a big classics girly. And that was a lot of the books that she was reading or talking about in this book. But if you are interested in them, sometimes she does talk about specific events in those books that could be seen as spoilery, or sometimes even just like straight up tells you how the book ends. So keep that in mind. Another thing that I struggled with is that I sometimes felt like she was relying on the fact that you have already read some of her other books. Like in the beginning, she even mentions like, hey, this is probably a topic you've heard me talk about. Some of the events that I'm going to mention in here, I've talked about more in depth in other books. And as someone who's not read her other books, sometimes I felt a little bit lost and like I was missing some context. So I do think that I could see myself reading more about this author. She is someone who lived through the Islamic Republic, which was a very oppressive society, especially to women. I did like how she was comparing what happened in the Islamic Republic to what America seems to be moving towards, and her fear of having to live through something like that again. So I do recommend this book, but there are other parts of me that think maybe it was slightly on the surface level aspect, and also that it could have been fleshed out a little bit more so that you could really read it as a standalone and not just as a companion to the other works that she has put out. All right, so moving into books that I've actually rated, the lowest book that I rated, I gave a 3.5 star, and it's actually the first book that I read this year. Starting the year off with a 3.5. Well, it's better than it being one of the DNFs, and that is going to be The World Gives Away by Marissa Levine. This is a sci-fi story that I was pretty excited to get to. The concept of it really intrigued me. We are following two people who are essentially living on a man-made planet. As usual, planet Earth was dying and we needed to travel somewhere else to restart humanity, but the journey there was really long, and so it was going to take a few generations, and so they created this world spaceship that would travel to this new destination. And there are two different groups on this spaceship. There are the people who could pay to be on the ship, and then there are those that kind of sign themselves and their descendants into servitude. So essentially they said, for this amount of time, your family is going to be in servitude. Even you're going to spend your whole life in servitude. Your kids are probably going to spend their whole life in servitude, their kids in servitude, and then the last generation will probably spend the majority of their life in servitude, and then they will eventually be free. And so we are following one person who is part of a family that used to be very wealthy, but they kind of lost their prestige over time, but he's still not in servitude. However, his family kind of goes to jail after trying to commit some cons to get more money, and he is kind of adopted by a man who works for the police department, and he himself kind of goes into that to kind of fight the criminals because, you know, he has a very unhealthy relationship with his parents. So he's very desperate to prove that he himself is not a criminal. In fact, he is out there to get the criminals. On the other hand, we are following a woman who is in servitude, but she is not happy with the fact that, yes, she'll be free once she's 70 or 80. She's like, no, I don't want to be free when I'm 70 or 80. I want to be free now when I'm young and I can actually do something with my life. And she is working for a very wealthy family who has recently had a baby. She loves this baby very much. It's kind of like her only joy in life. And then the parents end up committing suicide for a specific reason, and she kind of takes the baby and goes on the run. So the synopsis doesn't really say why they commit suicide or what is even going on. So it's really hard for me to talk about this book. So I'm gonna put a kind of semi-spoiler situation where I'm gonna tell you why they committed suicide and what the whole scenario is behind this book. If you want to go into it like not knowing anything, go ahead and jump ahead to when the word spoiler isn't here. I wouldn't say this is like gonna ruin your reading experience. It'll just kind of let you know what you're getting into. So essentially, these people are high enough up the food chain where they know that there has been damage made to the hull of the ship, and the ship is not going to make its way to its destination, and everyone on this ship is going to die. The ship is going to burst open, and everyone is going to be sucked into outer space, and they are going to perish. And they're like, peace out. We don't want to deal with that. We're just going to take ourselves out. And so our character, knowing the world is ending, is like, well, I'm not gonna sit around and wait for the police to come here and maybe pin this crime on me or even like send me off to some other job. Like, no, I'm taking this baby that I love and we're gonna go off and we're gonna just try and enjoy the last couple months of our life. And obviously, because these people are so rich and well known, the police are like, it's really suspicious that these people committed suicide and that their servant just disappears after kidnapping their baby. We should probably go hunt her down and figure like what the heck is going on. And so our other character is the one who gets assigned to this. This is kind of his big break to really prove that he is a good police officer, good detective. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna hunt her down no matter what it takes. And then he kind of starts to realize that there's some weird stuff going on in the world. Like there's way more earthquakes than there used to be, and it kind of seems like a couple of the really wealthy, important people have died, and maybe it was suicide just like these guys. And so then he kind of starts to be like, all right, I need to find this woman to like get some answers, because like what the heck is going on? So that is kind of the situation that we are dealing with, where we have these people that are just running against the clock. One of them knows she's running against the clock, the other one maybe suspects it but doesn't fully know that that is what is happening. And I feel like the idea of this story is really interesting, but at the same time I really struggled to connect to these characters. I don't know what it is, I just couldn't fully latch on to either of them. I didn't find either of them overly likable. I also felt like plot-wise, it feels like it should be such an exciting kind of situation, but it was kind of mundane, may I say. It wasn't overly exciting. I think it lacked a little bit of thrill, in my opinion. I did enjoy the writing. I think the writing was relatively well done. My favorite part of the story was the end. I think I was kind of thinking this would be like a 3-star book, but I bumped it up to a 3.5 just because I really did enjoy those final few chapters and like the very, very end of the story, kind of where our characters end up by the end of this whole the world's gonna end situation was, I don't know, I just felt like it was the perfect way for the story to end, so I really appreciated that. But overall, I will say the story ended up leaving me a little bit underwhelmed. All right, up next is the last book I finished this month, and it was actually a book that is on my February TBR. So this is the book that I decided to read after I DNF'd the Winter's Duke, because I was like, I want to read this book and not the Winter's Duke. And I ended up giving this 4 stars, and that is A One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole. I really enjoy Alyssa Cole's horror. I feel like a lot of people don't like it so much. I know when her first book, When No One Is Watching, came out, everyone was like, it's not horror, and then on the other side was saying it is horror, it's black horror though. And so you, as a white person, probably just can't fully appreciate it, and I, as a white person, probably can't fully appreciate it, but I still appreciate it. But that being said, this one does focus a little bit more broadly than racism. I feel like her other book really heavily focused on gentrification and racism within those gentrified communities. This book kind of focused more on the minority, the people being blamed for societal's woes, like, oh, it's those people's fault, everything is wrong. So that's kind of what this book focused more on. We are following our main character, I would say, is Ken. She's probably the one we hear from the most, and she has DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, meaning multiple personality disorder. She has a few different people in her head, and she didn't figure this out until she was a little bit older, and this was a very shocking discovery for her, especially because she kind of felt like she had, you know, maybe a complicated personality, but she had some good aspects to her, and she was a really good artist. And then she realized that more of the positive aspects of her and her ability to do art were because of her other personalities, and she herself is just kind of an asshole and kind of self-destructive. And so at the beginning of this book, trigger warnings, our character wakes up for the first time in 6 years. She has been dormant. Her other personalities have kind of taken over while she was gone. They were like, girl, you just pieced out, what the heck, we couldn't find you. And the reason she kind of went dormant is because she attempted to commit suicide, and her other personalities, out of self-preservation, kind of had prevented her from doing so. She is someone who has very low self-esteem. It is really hard to be in her head sometimes because she hates herself and she assumes everyone else hates her as well. So as someone who has definitely had thoughts about this in the past, it was really hard for me to read that, and I'm sure it would be hard for a lot of other people who tend to see only the worst in themselves and not what they contribute to their family and those around them. And that is very much what Ken is doing. Now, this book is set in 2020, so Trump is president. COVID is technically still pretty much going on, but it has kind of gotten to the point where everyone is just like, everything's fine, everything's normal. And it seems that when it comes to these multiple personalities, some of them are able to front, meaning they can control the body and all that, more than others. And Ken is one of the ones who can front long term, and so is another character named Dela. I hope I'm saying that right, Della. I kept calling her Dahlia throughout this, and then I looked at it and I was like, that's Dela, that's not Dahlia. So Dela. And so when Ken disappeared, Dela was kind of the one who had to front the majority of the time because the others could only front for like a few minutes or a few hours. And so she was the one who was kind of trying to keep them alive and well during this pandemic. And she is someone who's very organized. She is like the opposite of Ken. She is the one who keeps the receipts. She's the one who makes sure the bills are paid. And so she started to really struggle mentally. Like, she started to deteriorate to the point where at the beginning of this book, Ken wakes up. They have, for some reason, accepted this job on this island at this castle to be the caretaker, and Della is gone. And all the other headmates are like, we don't know where she is. We don't know how we got here. And so everyone is very confused, and they're like, well, Della was kind of losing it towards the end, so we have no idea what kind of situation she got us into. Things get even more complicated when they show up at this manor castle thing and realize it looks a little bit familiar to them. And they're like, okay, especially since they don't remember parts of their past. Often with DID, these other personalities are created through trauma. And so our character obviously went through something incredibly traumatic while she was in the foster care system when she was young. And she does not remember, but she's starting to suspect that maybe this castle had something to do with it. And things get even more complicated when her ex and his dad show up, especially since she kind of beat the shit out of his dad and ended up in jail because of that a few years ago before she went dormant. So this book I thought was really interesting when it came to the dynamics between the headmates. All of them are completely different appearance-wise, personality-wise, the kind of values they have, the kind of skills that they provide, the way that they interpret certain situations completely different. We have Ken, who's kind of like your primary person, you know, the OG of the headmates, I guess you could say. We have Solomon, who is kind of the one who tries to keep Ken from going off the rails. He is kind of the one who tries to make everyone be like, okay, everything is going to be fine. We're going to figure out the situation. We have Della, like we talked about, who is the one who keeps everything very organized. We have, I believe their name is Elizabeth. They go by she, they pronouns. They are a teenager. You know, teenagers. We have Kiki, who is like a 4-year-old child. We have Lurk, who doesn't really like show up a lot, and he kind of just like is very chill. He's like, hey, everything's fine, you know? And then we have Rapunzel, who is a headmate that they can't access. She is in the tower, and all she really does is occasionally scream in terror. So I really like the dynamics between these, especially Ken and Solomon, because it may seem weird to you, and I'm just triple checking that his name is Solomon, because me and names, yes, it is Solomon, because me and names are really bad, but they actually had a romantic relationship because she kind of thought he was an imaginary boyfriend for years. And so she and him are in a way kind of in love, which kind of goes to show you like how separate these beings are, because it's not like her being in love with herself or anything weird like that. So I thought that dynamic was really interesting. And then things that were happening on the castle. The pacing of this book is relatively slow. The author definitely takes her time kind of building up the story, kind of getting you familiar with the surroundings, getting familiar with Ken and her other headmates, and kind of giving you some flashbacks of what potentially got them to this situation. And then, of course, the sketchy people show up, and so does the storm, and then things really take off from there. Now, I only gave this 4 stars, one, because sometimes I did think the pacing was a little bit on the slow side until we got to that last, I don't know, like third or quarter of the book. And I also felt like the book was in a way kind of predictable. The direction that this book went, not anything super duper new, but at the same time, even though I knew this is where it was heading, it, instead of filling me with a sense of, oh, been there, done that, it felt more like dread. I was like, oh gosh, you know, I really don't want to see this play out. And I did like the way that it went about happening, and I ended up having a lot of fun with the story. I thought Ken was such a fun character, even when she was being self-destructive. She, I thought, had a really good sense of humor that really worked for me. So the story made me laugh quite a few times, and yeah, I had a great time with it. I know not a lot of people love this story, but I definitely think it's worth checking out, if only to get that DID representation and kind of see how the author interprets it. As someone who doesn't have DID or know a lot about it, did she do a good job? Did she do it realistically? I have no idea. I'm going to be honest, no idea. Don't come to me. I just had a lot of fun with this story, and I just think that Alyssa Cole with her thrillers is a little underappreciated, so I think it is worth checking out. All right, guys, we are getting to our last 2 books. I know that this wrap up is super long. I have quite a few books to get through, and I am feeling chatty today, so I apologize. But our next book I ended up rating 4.5 stars, and that is Moonstruck by Only James. This is the 3rd book in the Necessary Evil series. This is a series of 7 books, I believe, where we are following a group of adopted brothers who were adopted by this eccentric billionaire named Thomas. And essentially Thomas wanted to explore the idea that psychopaths and sociopaths, if raised in the right environment, could be beneficial for society, in that they take out the trash that the justice system doesn't. So essentially he raised them to be vigilantes. They get to go out and kill people like they want to, but they're killing the right people. In this book, we are following, there is a little gnat that was flying, Nat the bug. Someone used to call me that, Nat the bug, because my name's Natalie, and I was like, don't don't call me that, please. But in this book, we are following Atticus, and he is technically the first child. He is not the oldest because, you know, they were all adopted at different ages, but he is the first child that Thomas adopted for this program, let's call it. And he actually isn't really into killing. He doesn't really like doing it. Like, he has no problem with people dying. There's like a scene where he's watching someone get like chopped up and he's just eating a granola bar. Like, it really doesn't bother him, but he doesn't like to do it. He's like, it's dirty. I have to go out, you know, and hang out in the cold and trek through the woods, and it ruins my shoes. And he's just like not into it at all. He wants to be at his job, in his lab, in his office, just doing his thing. And one day at the beginning of this book, he is going off to kill this guy who has been taking advantage of undocumented women and sexually assaulting them because they can't go to the police. And so his family decides this guy needs to go because he's kind of a bag of shit. And so he goes there to the cabin that this guy likes to bring these women. And when he shows up, this other guy is actually like beating the shit out of him, cutting off his fingers. And he's like, hey, I'm supposed to be killing this guy, so what are you doing here? And the other guy's like, don't worry about it. I'm killing him, so you don't have to like be here anymore. And he's like, nah, I think I need to hang out and make sure you actually finish this job because I don't want to get in trouble for this guy like showing up later. So anyway, he sits down, eats his granola bar while the other guy finishes killing him. And then the other guy turns around and he's like, want to have sex now? And Atticus is like, I'm not gay, but sure. And so that is how their relationship starts. This other guy is the older brother of this kind of group of, let's call them lost boys. Essentially, he took revenge on someone who had assaulted his mother and left her slightly mentally disabled due to the injuries sustained. And the community around him realized what he did. And so when bad people pop up, they come to him and ask him to take care of this problem. And his younger brother and some other young queer men in the community who don't really have a strong support system at home have found themselves working for him. And so they're kind of like Atticus's family, but poor. And so Atticus and this guy like have an instant connection. Let me actually look up his name real quick. Jericho. His name is Jericho. So essentially, Jericho starts to realize that Atticus doesn't like killing and that he's really tired. He's tired of, you know, being in control at his job. He's tired of, you know, his brothers looking down at him for messing up during murder all the time. And he is just like done with it all. And Jericho's like, you want someone to take care of you? Baby, I'll take care of you. And if you want me to kill someone for you, I'll kill someone for you. And so that is kind of the dynamic that we're dealing with, where this Atticus guy is like, yes, I'm just a big baby and I want someone to take care of me. I'm just a soft boy who was forced to be turned into a killer, and I just want someone to love me and take care of me. And Jericho is there to do that for him. I really loved this book because I really enjoyed their dynamic. This was the first time where we were dealing with one of our psychopaths, and his love interest was really questioning if he is in fact a psychopath. Like, he is like, is this man a psychopath, or is he someone who experienced extreme trauma as a child and then was raised to be a killer? So it kind of starts to throw that thing into question of what makes a psychopath and what is just a traumatized person who maybe has a high tolerance for murder. So I really liked that aspect of the story. I really liked watching these two families kind of come together because they kind of have a similar goal. We also got a couple hints at some couples that are going to be in future books, and I was literally salivating at the thought of reading their stories. So this book really hyped me up for the rest of the series, because book 2 I thought was okay. I didn't like it as much as book one, so I was kind of worried that it was maybe like a one-hit wonder, but no, this book for sure reinvigorated my interest in the series, and I can't wait to continue. All right, guys, and the final book is a 5-star despite the DNFs and starting the year off with a 3.5. We did manage to sneak in a 5-star read this month, and that is going to be Flash Fire by TJ Klune. This is the second book in the Extraordinary series, I'm assuming is what it's called. The first book is called Extraordinaries. In this book, we are following Nick, and he lives in a world where there are people who have special abilities. It's pretty infrequent for this to be a thing, and there are weird powers. Most of them aren't like super strength and flying. There's someone who can like mind control sheep kind of situation. So that is kind of what we're dealing with. And in his city, there are 2 superheroes, and he has a big crush on one of them and is actually really well known for his fan fiction that he kind of self-inserts himself in with this superhero. And at the beginning of the first book, he kind of decides that he wants to see if he can turn himself into a superhero so that he can fight alongside this man he loves. And he does so by kind of looking up how people in like comic books and movies turn into superheroes, and his friends are like, Nick, stop trying to kill yourself, we're begging you, like you're stressing us out so much. And his dad is like, I'm begging you, like please. You know, I already lost your mother. He did lose his mother a few years ago, and now it is him and his father. And I really enjoyed his relationship with his father, and I love his relationship with his friends. Nick has ADHD. He is just bouncing off the walls, and I get so much secondhand embarrassment from him. But while sometimes secondhand embarrassment like annoys me, I find it endearing when it comes to Nick. And he also has a best friend named Seth who is featured on this cover, and it seems that Seth has some stronger feelings for him than friendship, and I also enjoyed exploring that relationship. In the second book, obviously I'm not going to tell you what is really happening, but I will say it focuses a lot more on criticizing the actions of the police. Nick's father is a police officer, and he has done some things that maybe he shouldn't have done as a police officer, and there are people definitely who call him out on that. And then we also see Nick start to realize that even though he loves his father and he has a good relationship with a few police officers, including the captain, he also starts to really realize just because those people are people he cares about doesn't mean that the system that they are a part of is good. And he kind of really starts to have his eyes open to the flaws of the police department. I always enjoy when an author takes the opportunity to talk about some of the flaws with the police system here in America, especially if they have a character who is a police officer. I know Cole McCade does that a lot in his Criminal Intentions series, and I do think that's something I appreciate and that authors should definitely do. I don't think that police officers should always be portrayed as a bad guy, but the system as a whole is definitely very flawed, and I think that that is something that authors should mention in their books. So I'm glad that happened. Once again, I had so much fun with this book. I picked this book up because I was like, I need to laugh, I need to smile, I need to feel good, and that is exactly what I got in this book. I was just happy the whole time I was reading it, and considering some things that were happening here in January, my mental health definitely started to wane a little bit. This book definitely gave me a bit of a boost. I love Nick as a character. I love watching him grow as a person. I love the relationships he has with those around him. I am definitely intrigued to see where the story goes from here. There was some stuff that happened in here that I predicted would happen based off of how the first book ends, so I definitely do like the direction the author is taking the story. I think there is a lot of exciting stuff happening. We have some more superheroes, some new cool unique characters popping up to assist and hang out with our characters. And yeah, just a 5-star read overall. Had a great time with it. As always, I am a TJ Klune fan. I will say I've struggled a little bit with his newer stuff, kind of like House in the Cerulean Sea, In the Lives of Puppets, Under the Whispering Door. I didn't like as much as some of like his older stuff. Like you see all that up there, that's all TJ Klune. But I'm very excited that I was very pleasantly surprised by this series, and glad to know that there are times where I do have a wonderful time with his traditionally published work. All right, guys, whew, this video, I am looking at the timer, has just crossed the 1 hour mark, which is usually not something that happens to me. Maybe I should try a little bit harder to bring back my mid-month wrap-ups if I'm going to be chatting so much about these books. But I hope you enjoyed the reviews and maybe found some books that you want to pick up. This is my list of books that I was planning on reading. As you can see, we DNF'd quite a few of them. The only books I didn't get to were Atomic Habits. I decided I didn't really want to pick that up right now. I am reading the transgender issue right now. That is the nonfiction book I picked up in place of the Atomic Habits book, so I am working my way through that. And then of course Mother of Dawn and Death. You can see the book there. I am actually, after I finish this video, heading to the library to pick this book up because like I just never got it during the month, so obviously I didn't read it. It is not on my February TBR, but hopefully I can get to it in March. But otherwise, I think this was an interesting month as far as reading goes. I don't really know if I want to say it was a bad month, but it also wasn't like super great, so we're gonna say it was like a mid-month, which is not what we want. Like I said at the beginning, we don't want to end this year feeling mid about our reading. So hopefully we have a upward trajectory from here, more 5-star reads to come. I would love to know what books you guys started the year off with. How has your reading been going? Did you start with a 5-star or did you start with a 3.5 star like I did? Do you have a feeling like every year you read, you start DNFing books more because you're just like more in tuned in what you like, and so you're able to catch on if a book is not for you earlier? Because I feel like that's kind of what's happening to me right now. But that being said, thank you guys as always for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!